We have part 2 of the renal system here, the urinary system. And the whole idea here is that we're going to be concentrating water in the body and taking it back up, taking water back up. We're trying to spare water, we're trying to spare nutrients. And so here's what's going to happen. We're going to have the flow of blood coming in. It's going to be distributed through all of these branches, these branching arteries, all the way out here to what's called an arcuate artery. Do you see that? There's an arcuate vein and an arcuate artery. That defines the boundary between the cortex and the medulla. So always remember the arcuate artery for that purpose. Then there's going to be more and more branches that go out this way. The blood will get filtered, and it will get taken back up again in terms of just the essential nutrients. We'll get into that detail in a moment. And again, here's the pyramid, and here we have the free flow of the filtrate resulting from the dialysis of the blood. It's going to flow in here into these minor calyces. The minor calyx will flow into the major calyces. The major will come and go to the renal pelvis. The pelvis is this enlarged area of the ureter. The ureter will then conduct the urine away, soon to become urine, still called filtrate. This is under the influence of peristalsis, so it's safe to say that you can stand on your head doing your meditative practices, and it turns out that because of peristalsis, the filtrate will continue to move along the ureter no matter what position your body is in. Here's the sort of schematic, as it were. Here we have the aorta. Blood just arrives from the heart. We have a mean arterial blood pressure, probably more like 88. I have 80 there. That's kind of a low mean arterial blood pressure. So maybe 88 to maybe 91 or 2. Hopefully not more than that. Okay, so 88 millimeters of mercury if we were to average out the pulse pressure. And then as we come down, once we get into the arterioles, there's no more pulse pressure, and we're also dropped now to about 50 millimeters of mercury, and we're going to actually cross the glomerulus, the glomerular capillaries. So here we have the afferent arteriole, here we have the efferent arteriole. The reason I'm showing this to you is because capillaries often have at the arterial end 50 millimeters of mercury of pressure, but it very quickly drops normally to about 10 by the time you get to the venule. But notice on this side we don't have a venule, we have a continuation of arteriole. That's a unique situation, unique to the kidneys. We really need to have high blood pressure in the kidneys in order to make this work. So ultimately this works because the capillaries in the kidney are fenestrated. They have big open windows, and they, how shall I say, spurt or sprinkle water out. Or in this case, it's plasma, blood plasma. Anything that's dissolved in liquid will come through. And so we're in a high-pressure system. 50 is very high for the middle of a capillary bed, and there's no part of the capillary that's not 50. Keep that in mind. So that means that there is no uptake of waste. This is all outflow. Everything is being tossed out. The baby and the bathwater are going to be tossed out. And then we selectively take back in through these convoluted tubules. We take back in all of the nutrients that we had acquired from eating. Okay, a lot of the kidney specialists, the renal specialists will say that this thing that we call the nephron here, the nephron is everything from Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, Henle's loop, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. This entire thing here, according to many kidney experts, as they say, is basically just like the digestive system, and they often think of the small intestine as simply the first nephron. And there's going to be many more visits to the nephrons here because we do this dialysis maybe 40 times a day based on clearance rates and so on. Okay, here we have the afferent arteriole. Remember, afferent, the A stands for going at. And then we have the efferent arteriole over here. The E stands for exit. Okay, so afferent coming in, efferent leaving. And here we have capillaries, and this unique situation where capillaries are situated between two arterioles. So that's important. Here is your landmark, your anatomical landmark. The arcuate artery and vein divides the cortex from the medulla. Oftentimes the Henle's loop here hangs down into the medulla. It's a normal procedure. Eventually we get to the distal convoluted tubule, and then we get the exit out here into the collecting duct. The chief cells of the collecting duct have a unique property. They are acted upon by aldosterone specifically, and they exchange sodium for potassium. So potassium becomes the waste product that ends up in the urine in part because the kidney is sparing sodium in many cases. Okay, as we come down the route here, we come down through the collecting duct, and here we're acted upon by ADH, and we have aquaporins, and water flows out. Okay, that water is picked up by the nearby capillaries and returned to the bloodstream. Okay, here we have a glomerulus surrounded by a Bowman's capsule. What they're trying to tell us here are some things about distal and proximal convoluted tubules that I alluded to. A lot of work is done in those areas, particularly in the proximal convoluted tubule. Let's take a look at proximals. They give us some examples here. The proximals have a lighter stain in the nuclear area and in the cellular area, and then in here they have things that are filling up the interior. Compare that with a distal convoluted tubule, and you'll notice that the staining is different for the cells, and also there's very little left here in the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so what that means is that all of this interior, how shall I say, stuff that's in there are microvilli, but their microvilli have such a profound length that we call them literally a brush border. And that's where that term originally came from. Okay, then here's the overview again. I like this picture very much. It shows us having the proximal here and distal convoluted tubule. And here is Bowman's capsule surrounding the glomerulus, and there's a certain amount of blood coming in. It's under some pressure. And, okay, so they bracket some areas here. So we'll pick that up in the next video.